Welcome, dear learners. Welcome to the lecture series on investment management. Dear learners, today we'll take up unit number 2, and the name of the unit is Fixed Income Securities Analysis and Valuation. So before we discuss something about fixed income securities, we need to understand the long-term sources of finance. So basically, whatever the size of the business, whether it is a small enterprise or a big enterprise, everyone requires finance. We know the fact that finance is the lifeblood of economy. So to support its investments, a firm must find the means to finance them. That means it needs to identify various sources to finance its investments. But there are two broad sources available to the firm. That is equity, and second one is debt. So equity and debt represent the two broad sources of finance for a business firms, whatever the business firm may be. So these are the two broad sources of finances available to the firm to finance its investments. Now by equity we mean that it is the shareholders' funds on balance sheets. It consists of equity capital, retained earnings and preference capital. By debt we mean that loan funds on the balance sheet. Generally it consists of term loans, debentures and other borrowings. Now our matter of interest for this chapter will be the debt. Now you might be understanding why we are discussing this long-term source of finance without directly entering into the chapter. See, our chapter name is Fixed Income Securities Analysis and Valuation, and in the long-term source of finance we have studied two broad sources, one is equity and one is debt. My dear friends, by your kind information, debt is also known as the fixed income security. So in second unit we will be learning this debt instrument, that is the fixed income security analysis and valuation. That is the reason why I wanted to explain you the long-term sources of finance. Now once you have understood these long-term sources of finance, now let us move forward to discuss something about this debentures. Now whatever the name you use, debt, debentures, bonds, etc., etc., all are same. See, few people use the term bond, few people use the term debenture, and few people use the term debt. See, whatever it may be, all are same. See, generally in the financial world all these terms are same. So sometimes people use bonds. See, when a government is raising debt or raising capital or raising funds through debt, then it is called bond. When a company is raising capital using debt, then it is called debenture. So whatever may be the term, in the financial world we consider all these terms are similar. So basically debenture is an instrument. Let me explain you what is a debenture first. So debenture, bond or debt are one and the same. So what is debenture? Debenture is an instrument used to raise long-term loans. That means long-term loan in the sense more than 1 year. A capital or loan taken for more than 1 year. So it is an instrument through which you can borrow funds for a long-term period. So debenture holders, then they can be classified as creditors in the company. That is the reason we say them as, or we classify debenture holders as creditors of the company. Now once we have understood this debenture, let us understand few characteristics features of the debentures. The first characteristic of debenture is Debt investors are entitled to contractual set of cash flows. Suppose if you buy a debenture from a company, that means you are investing in debt. You will be entitled to a contractual set of cash flows. That means you will be receiving interest at the end of every year and principal at the end of your maturity period. So these two set of cash flows you will be receiving as an investor of debenture. The second characteristic is the interest paid to the debt investors represent a tax deductible expenses. Generally, we have EBIT. EBIT is earnings before interest and tax. So this earnings before interest and EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. From this EBIT, first we will try to deduct what? The interest. Now interest is the amount paid to whom? The debenture holders. Because in the first characteristic of the debt is debt investors are entitled to contractual set of cash flows. One is interest, one is principal. So company will be paying interest to the debenture holders. So from the earnings of the company, first priority is given to the interest payment. That is interest from the EBIT, first interest will be deducted. From the EBIT, I is gone, the leftover. So the resultant figure is the earnings before tax. So that is the reason. So before paying tax, you are paying the interest. That means interest paid to the debt holders or debenture holders represents a tax deductible expenses. So after paying interest to the debenture holders, you will calculate the tax. Now next is debt has a fixed maturity. As I said, he is entitled to a contractual set of cash flows for a period of time. See, there are different classes of debt. Again, the debt can be irredeemable or redeemable. See, irredeemable debt is a perpetual debt. That means there is no maturity. But for a redeemable debt, it can be redeemed. That means you can take away your principal on a date mentioned on the bond. Now the date mentioned on the bond is called maturity. Suppose, for example, if ABC company is issuing bonds worth rupees 100 for 5 years, this 5 years term is called maturity. Till 5 years you will be receiving interest, and at the end of 5 years you will be surrendering the bond and getting your principal back. So this 5 years, the period when the bond matures is called maturity, and this maturity period for redeemable debt, it is fixed. Now the last characteristics, there are many characteristics. I am discussing a few out of them. Debt investors play a passive role in controlling the affairs of the company. See, we know the fact that equity shareholders are the real owners of the company. They play an active role in managing or controlling the affairs of the company. But whereas debt holders, they only enjoy the contractual set of cash flows. They do not bear any risk. That is the reason they play a passive role in controlling the affairs of the firm. So this is what is all about the introduction to debentures. So before we take up problems, etc., I wanted you to understand the basics of debentures. So that is what I have crafted this lecture on the basics of debentures. So let us sum up what we have learned in this lecture. We have started this lecture by understanding the long-term sources of finance, where we have classified the long-term sources of finance into two categories. One is equity and one is debt. So our area of interest is debt in unit number 2, and in unit number 3 we will be learning something about equity. So we have understood debt is an instrument used to raise the long-term loans, and that is the reason why debenture holders are called creditors of the company. And we have also understood some characteristics of debt. So we will be coming up with the next lecture soon. So till then, good day, goodbye.